Welcome to Web Handling. My name is Dave Roysum. I am very excited to begin a new mini-series on ethics and efficacy in web handling. I have been into about 1,000 plants doing problem solving. Here, I will share some of my experiences on how to improve customer-supplier interactions, how to improve employer-employee morale and performance, as well as how to work with third parties. Ethics and efficacy are complementary behaviors that will help make the problem-solving process better, faster, and cheaper. Customers, bless you. You are the source of our paychecks. Still, you can also be the source of unnecessary difficulties if certain ethical and effective behaviors are weak. If you are a customer, here are some of your obligations to your supplier to make this relationship most effective. Your primary obligation is documentation. If a role gives you trouble, please note the role ID number as well as the MD and CD position where that trouble occurred. Please use standard language to avoid miscommunication. Standard language for most defects is thoroughly documented in the one must-have book, The Ultimate Role and Web Troubleshooting Guide by Tappy Press. Take pictures or video. Better yet, take samples if appropriate for that type of trouble. If the supplier asks, return the remainder of that role that gave you trouble. It is wise and often necessary for the supplier to see the difficulty in person if they are to be a helpful problem-solving partner. Yes, it is always intrusive and sometimes risky to let an outsider in. It can be really intrusive if they ask to run trials. Still, without seeing the dynamics in person and on location, many troubles simply can't be diagnosed at all, and most can't be diagnosed safely, with one exception. That one exception is defects that would clearly give any process fits. Examples would be holes in the web or wrinkles that come from the supply role itself. Please don't expect the supplier to necessarily fix the problem. They may not be able to if you are the source of the trouble. They also may not be able to fix the problem even if they are the primary source because they don't know how or they can't afford it. So to protect yourself, always have a second qualified supplier for any raw material. If you are a supplier, you also have many obligations. The first and foremost is to correctly diagnose the system issue as best as can be done. This begins by autopsying every single claim and role. If the trouble is obviously of your own making, such as a hole in the web or wrinkle in your wound roll, acknowledge that claim promptly and pay the claim immediately. If the entire system mechanics is not crystal clear, then you need to do a lot more homework. This starts with a visit to your customer to see firsthand what's up. It is wickedly dangerous to assume the customer's language describes the situation accurately, or completely, or even at all. Don't promise to fix a problem whose entire system mechanics is not crystal clear. It is perfectly fine to beg or buy time by promising to look into the problem with every resource possible. That would certainly include going to school on the problem and reading the literature on the problem. If the problem were coding, for example, at least some of your people should have been recently to a coding school. If the problem were web handling, you should have been to my Web 101 course. After that, you may even include bringing in outside experts, which we will discuss in an upcoming clip. The relationship and issues with new machines is in some ways different than with raw materials. For one thing, you likely have a warranty that may even include performance agreements. There are many things that are quite reasonable to include in the agreements. One, for example, I give in my Web 101 class has to do with certain failure modes and reliability for which the supplier has nearly complete control. An example would be to insist that the machine run, say, 200 consecutive hours without a mechanical break or an electrical fault that are not of the customer's making. Another example I teach in my winding class is to run, say, 200 consecutive roll transfers without a miss on a turret winder. Still, most performance issues would not make reasonable performance agreement provisions. An example here is to wind a good roll. What the hell is a good roll anyway? Can you make a good roll out of a bad web? All of these and much, much more is discussed in my Web Machine Buying Guide book. Startups can be difficult, sometimes very difficult. Neither party should make them any more difficult by discussing who is going to pay for what while trying to fix the problems. Let the engineers on both sides contribute what they can as problem-solving partners. Later, we will let the bean counters sort out who is going to pay for what. A tissue supplier got a complaint from a Mexican customer for low basis weight. The supplier paid the small claim without further thought or investigation. A month later, they got a second claim for the same problem, low basis weight. This time, the supplier looked at the roll ID number provided and checked the previous test lab results for that roll. Nothing was out of spec. So, the supplier gave it no more thought and paid that claim too. Finally, a couple of weeks later, they got yet a third complaint for the same problem, low basis weight. This time, the supplier asked the customer to send back a sample of that low basis weight so they can measure it in their test lab. The supplier opened up the envelope to find a sample with a hole in it. That was not just low basis weight, it was no basis weight at all. While you might dismiss this war story as an issue with people whose second or third language is English, think again. My experience is that communication is far more risky when both parties are fluent in English. The reason is that you assume what the other is saying. Language is all over the map for certain defects. That is why we wrote the Roll and Web Troubleshooting Guide. Among its many uses, it standardizes language for common defects. For example, corrugations is the proper term for defects that are sometimes called ropes and sometimes improperly called tin cans, because a tin can is an entirely different defect. So we close with best practices for effective communication that is essential for effective problem solving. Note that the traditional route of operator complaining to process engineer, who complains to purchasing, who may complain to the plant manager, who complains to the supplier's plant manager, who complains to the process engineer, who then complains to the operator who saw more of that defect than almost anyone else. simply does not work. Bypass all of this BS. Send your best operator and your best process engineer to your customer's plant to talk directly to their operator and their engineer. Thank you so very much for watching this module in my Plant Practical video series. Stay tuned for the next clip where we will describe best practices for working with operators and other authorities. Be sure to like and share. See you next time.